The Sunfallen Road, Chapter 9. When I arose in the evening, just after sunset, I found a very happy Silver out in the garden, dressed in a new pair of green cargo shorts and a t-shirt featuring a popular rock band, Motorhead. I'd never developed a dramatic taste for rock music, but nevertheless there was something incredibly human about it, so driven and aggressive. He waved to me as I approached. "Hi, Mel," he called. "I'm just about finished." I grinned as I joined him over the marigolds and set down the basket I was carrying. "This looks fantastic, Silver." I'd left him a list of instructions to use in case he'd never gardened before, and he'd followed them to the letter, I saw. He smiled. "You have a lot of beautiful flowers. I got all the weeds, too." "Great, thank you." Uncharacteristically, I was wearing jeans and a blouse. Usually I was dressed very professionally, and I still had a heavy taste for the old fashions I'd grown up with. For a few days, though, I was taking some time off to get to know this person that now lived in my house. With the speed gift, I'd raced through all my paperwork the night before, which left me a few days of leisure time. The Regent didn't much care when the work got done, as long as it got done on time. It was one of the reasons he'd hired me. "You know a lot about plants," I said thoughtfully. "This is very well done." He smiled. "I've always liked them, so I've read a lot. I hope I didn't rip up anything important, though." "Not at all," I said. I picked up a pair of garden shears by his feet and strode to the roses. "I'll cut a bouquet for the house. The roses tend to overgrow if they're not pruned," I said, beginning to cut the roses carefully, letting them fall into the basket. "Oh, now that I didn't know," he said, going back to aerating the soil. I filled the basket quickly, and when I'd finished, I turned towards him. "You and I should do something tonight, I think." Silver turned to look at me. "Like what?" "I don't get out much," I said, half smiling. "I was hoping you might have some suggestion." He thought for a moment. "Maybe a film? Or dinner? Something?" "Certainly. What do you like to eat?" He smiled. "Sushi is my favorite. Do you like it?" I shook my head. "I have never tried it." "Oh, you've got to try it," he said. For the first time, I looked hard at him. His hair was a lot longer than I thought, black and shiny and slightly wavy, almost down to his slender hips, though today he'd tied it back to garden. His cheekbones were high, and his blue eyes had epicanthic folds. "Silver, if you don't mind me asking, what's your heritage?" "I'm Japanese and Irish, mostly, with a smattering of the other Celtic nations," he said. "How about you?" "Greek and Spanish. A little Moroccan, according to my father. And a little French," I said. He smiled. "I should have known. The Greek is especially obvious." He reached out and playfully twirled one of my curls between his fingers, an unexpectedly familiar gesture. I laughed, resisting the urge to twitch backward from his touch. People didn't touch me often, and when they did, I usually found it disconcerting. But I didn't want to discomfit him. I'd developed a touch of agoraphobia over the last couple of centuries, and that wasn't something I was ready for him to know. For all I knew, I must try to conquer it. "Tell me about your parents," I said, gently taking the hoe from his hands. He lost his smile. "Maybe another time." I didn't question him, but I nodded and moved towards the garden shed, depositing our tools inside. We headed back towards the house, where I arranged the roses into vases in the kitchen while he watched, strangely fascinated, and handed one to him. "For your room, if you like," I said as I walked towards my own room with the flowers. Flowers always make me feel better. I think it's the fact that they're alive, however briefly, and a part of me clings to what makes things alive and breathing. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the garden, I can almost hear the plants breathe, hear their life force. It's soothing. I went back towards his room, knocked on the lintel. He smiled at me through the door. "Come on in." "So show me what you bought," I said, sitting on his bed. "Oh, sure," he said, leaning down beside the bureau. He showed me all the clothes he'd bought. Boots, an MP3 player, a windbreaker for when the rains came. "I felt kind of weird about getting this since it was your money and all, but I saw this and I thought maybe you'd like it," he said, pulling a small box out of one of the bags. He handed it to me. I opened it, and inside was a cross made of a tiny freshwater pearl sewn together with a silver chain. I looked up at him. Why did you get me this? He shrugged and half smiled. I don't know. It seemed right. I looked at the cross again, and I wondered. I changed into a black lace skirt and a silk tank top, and I asked Silver to put on the cross for me. He did so, and smiled when I turned around. It looks very pretty on you. I smiled briefly. Thank you for thinking of me. Oh, also, there was money left over, so here you go. He handed me some bills and coins, or tried to. And keep it. You might need it for something else. Consider this your first paycheck. He raised an eyebrow. I nodded. He shook his head. All right, you're the boss. He cast me that wry grin as he put the money back into his pocket. I'm paying for my dinner, though. Acceptable. I looked him over. Dark wash jeans, a white t-shirt, and I saw now that he wore a cross of his own, also silver, like his name, in the Celtic style. Is your name really Silver? I asked. He shrugged. I don't really like my real one. Another kid I used to know started calling me Silver when I left home, and it just stuck. I looked at him curiously. Well, we can talk about it over dinner. Come on, you must be starving after all the work you did today. We got into my car, a sensible dark green Volkswagen, and I asked him, where to? There's a great Japanese place not too far away where I used to go sometimes. You want to try it? Sure. Know the address? I turned on the car's GPS feature. He didn't, but we plugged in the name of the restaurant, and about 10 minutes later, we were at a modern-looking Japanese restaurant. It was a Saturday evening, so naturally, the place was crowded. I knew Silver was hungry, though, so even more naturally, I cheated. I spoke briefly to the hostess, and I used the transgift to get her to seat us ahead of the other patrons. A few minutes later, we had a table. Silver didn't even notice. He seemed lost in his thoughts. You'll have to help me navigate the menu, I said to him. I've never had Japanese food before. Oh, here, I'll help you, he said, pulling his chair around our table to sit near me. He went over the menu and explained what each item was and how it was prepared. I decided on an eel roll, edamame. Soybeans were something I'd never had, but Silver assured me that they were delicious. A butterfly shrimp roll and miso soup. Silver ordered even more food than I did. A yellowtail roll, a specialty roll involving salmon, roe, shrimp, and Japanese pear, miso, sweet buns, another order of edamame, and shumai, a type of dumpling. I can't believe you're going to eat all that, I exclaimed after the waitress had taken our orders and bustled away. I have an inner fat kid, he joked. I always eat a lot, probably because I'm so skinny. My body just burns through it. The food went right through me too, although not for the same reasons. I laughed anyway. As you like. When our appetizers and drinks came, I said quietly, so why do you not like your name? He grew serious. You won't believe me. I put down my green tea and eyed him just as seriously. You wouldn't believe what I'd believe. He began to talk about an experience he'd had not long after he graduated high school. Since childhood, he'd been highly spiritual, describing several instances of personal gnosis. He even kept an altar in his room, with small objects he found conveyed a sense of sacredness, like stones, feathers, and a rosary, and prayed there daily. He said that talking to the divine gave him peace, and there was little to no peace in his household. His parents fought constantly, and his siblings were always angry or sad. But one day, he said he felt like he had left his body and entered a different realm, one that was like ours, but not like ours. It was beautiful, but also horrible in its beauty, and he saw many kinds of beings, human and animal alike. He caught sight of a wolf, and he followed the wolf into a forest, where he saw a tree, glowing and beautiful, with cherry blossoms drifting down to carpet the forest floor. He spoke to the tree, and when he returned from that place, he temporarily could not remember who he was. He only knew that he had to leave that house, and right then, to try to make his way in the world. The way he described it, it was not a choice to leave. It was an imperative, like breathing. So I packed some things and I left, he said. And I go to different places and try different things, and I try to bring people peace. Somehow I always find what I need, but when I dream, I see the wolf and I see that tree all the time. I considered. Klaus had once spoken to me about different planes of existence, in particular about the ethereal plane. He said sometimes he could see into it, but being what he was, he could not enter. What Silver was describing sounded to me like the ethereal plane, if indeed such a thing existed. One of my areas of interest was comparative religion, so I read a lot of books about theology and alternate realms. I told him so. His eyes lit up. You think I went to another plane? It's the only explanation that makes any sense if it was not just a dream, I said as our food arrived. I paused as the server set down our dishes before continuing. Few people have spiritual experiences that render them unable to remember their own names. How long ago was it? A few years. I remembered afterwards, but it took a little bit. He picked up his chopsticks. Off subject, do you know how to use these? I laughed. I never have. Show me. He showed me how to manipulate the chopsticks, and fortunately, I was a quick study. I picked up my food, and I didn't drop a single piece on the way to my mouth with them. Silver was impressed. When at last we finished eating, Silver sat back in his chair and sighed. Ah, this is the life. I laughed again. Dessert? Yeah, but not here. There's someplace else I'd go with you for dessert. I nodded. Deal. We settled the check and headed back to my car. Silver programmed another address into the GPS. Best pastries you'll ever have. It turned out to be an Italian cafe a couple of miles west of where we were. I ordered chocolate cheesecake and a cappuccino, while Silver ordered 3 cannolis and a coffee. We sat down at a table and watched the moon come up out of the east. Have you ever had cannoli? He asked me as he bit into one of them. Oh yes, many times. It's wonderful stuff. He offered me one of his unbitten pastries, and I took a bite, savoring the rich cream and pastry shell. Delicious, was my remark. He smiled and nodded, polishing off the cannoli in 2 big bites. I laughed at him, going back to my cheesecake. How long do you want me to stay? He asked, sipping his coffee. As long as you want. Although I should probably tell you that I spend occasional periods of time away from home, for business. What is it you do, anyway? I'm a diplomat. Oh, that's so cool, he exclaimed. What are you working on right now? A communications liaison between the US and France, I said, which was technically true. At present, I was establishing communications between the regions of Paris and Chicago. Neat, he said, taking another bite of cannoli. We went home in due course and spent a few hours in the machine room, seated on floor cushions, playing video games and laughing like fools. Eventually, he yawned. I should go to bed. Feel free if you're tired, I said, leaning forward and switching off the gaming console. He nodded. He got to his knees, and, leaning over, he kissed my cheek. I was surprised, and I looked at him. Good night, Mel, he said, and got to his feet. Good night, Silver, I said quietly as he left the room.